Hey everyone, welcome to another episode in Adventures of Comprehension. My name is Sierra Harris and I am the author at Sierra Harris Teaching. And I come to you every week with a brand new video, all focusing on different things having to do with reading comprehension. And so tonight we're actually going to be talking about two different important components of reading, which is comprehension with fluency. I know we've all had those students where, they may not have been the best decoders. Their ability to track and read words at an average rate was just not the best. They didn't read with very much expression. They had issues with fluency. And so tonight we're going to be talking about some strategies and some things that we can do as teachers to help comprehension with students who have struggled with fluency. Okay? So, super excited about this, and we're going to dive right in. All right, before we really get started with all of the strategies, I want to make sure we're kind of on the same page, and I want to share a little bit about my philosophy when it comes to fluency and comprehension. I know there's research out there that says these two things are connected, and I completely agree. Clearly, if a student is struggling and they're decoding every other word, and they're having to stop and think a lot about what the words are instead of what they mean, that clearly is going to impact their ability to comprehend. However, just because a student's fluency is lacking does not mean their inability to comprehend a text is going to lack. We really need, when we're thinking about teaching and teaching students reading, we need to think about these two components separately as much as we need to think about them joined, okay? Yes, fluency impacts comprehension, okay? I'm never ever saying that that is not true. So everything I say tonight, I want you to remember, I do believe fluency impacts comprehension. But we need to make sure as teachers, as educators, that we are also keeping these two components separate, focusing on each one individually in order to make sure that when fluency is where it needs to be, the comprehension will be as well. And I'll talk more about this here as we walk through tonight, okay? So it's very important for educators to know that fluency is like a vehicle for reading comprehension. It's a tool that we use to get them from one place to the end goal. It's not everything, okay? It's not everything that I, focus on. And I still held all of my students who struggled with fluency to the same high standards that even I had for my highest students who didn't struggle with fluency. Because to me, it's all about the thinking, okay? They can think even if they are not able to read the words the best that they can. But their ability to think is not hindered by their fluency. And that, when I came to that conclusion through all of my work with all of my students year in, year out in my classroom, and I finally came to that conclusion that, wow, I have these students who struggle reading, meaning they're not fluent. They decode every other word. And, I had students who with dyslexia and, other learning disabilities. But when I separated the two, when I separated fluency and comprehension apart, and I made sure that they knew that reading wasn't just reading these words, but reading was understanding what they read and thinking about what they read, and to show them that they can do that skill on its own, then that upped their confidence and their ability to push through all of their struggles and weaknesses even more. So we're going to talk a lot about how I got to that point in our video tonight. So we know that the ultimate goal of reading is to make meaning and to comprehend what we read, not how fast we read it, right? Just remember that fluency is a vehicle to our end goal. It's not the entire journey, all right? There are other pieces that are just as important, if not more important, when it comes to reading comprehension. So I want you to think about your group of students, because I know you have them. I want you to think about your group of students who struggle with comprehension because of fluency, okay? And I want you to keep those students in mind as we talk tonight and think about what are some changes we can make in our reading lessons, whether they're whole group or small group for those students. But what are some changes we can make as we learn and talk about some of the pieces tonight? And then I want you to really reflect on what kind of impact we can make with those students when we start to pull these two components apart. Like I said, for many, many years, as many educators do, think they go hand in hand. And I'm not going to say it again. They do go hand in hand. Fluency impacts comprehension. I get it. But until I took them apart and showed students the power of the thinking with the reading as much as power behind decoding with reading, and I got those students who struggled with fluency to understand that they still can be held accountable for their thinking and their comprehension abilities, and they can do that, that made a world of difference. Slow readers can be exceptional thinkers. I'm going to say that again. And I feel like I want that postered in my classroom. Maybe not my classroom. Maybe my office. I don't know. Slow readers can be exceptional thinkers. Okay? Even if they can't read a lick of that passage or text that I give them, even if they can't read a bit of it, okay, I can still teach them to think as we read out loud or as they're listening. I can still teach them all of the skills and strategies that I need to. And then when they work on their fluency at a separate time and with a passage that's appropriate for them, and we get to the point where they can decode and they've got their sight words, then when we get over to comprehension, I'm not having to start over. I'm not having to go back to level one and go, okay, we've been focusing on fluency with you, for months and months in guided reading. Now we're going to start with comprehension. What? No. No, they need to be focused on almost separately and together at the same time, if that makes sense. So, slow readers can be exceptional thinkers. So, we're going to talk through some different strategies, and these all, some may be very actionable, but some may be more philosophical, if I could say that correctly, strategies, but all things that I want you to think about when it comes to how you're approaching this group of students that I'm having you kind of focus on tonight. So again, some are going to be more actionable than others, but all are going to be things that I want you to think about and how they are going to impact those specific or that specific group of readers, okay? So the first thing I want you to think about is to understand what reasonable accuracy is, okay? Even as adults, my accuracy is not 100%, okay? There are words that I stumble on. There are words that I change that don't impact the comprehension, right? There are a lot of things that I do as a natural reader, as an adult reader, that if I were to take a fluency test, I probably wouldn't score 100. Now, if I knew it was a fluency test and I was trying for that, I probably would. But if think about yourself as a reader. You're not 100% accurate all the time. Excuse me. So we need to have an understanding of what reasonable accuracy is for these students. So I'm not nickel and diming them all the time when it comes to their reading accuracy. Let them read. Let them get words wrong that are going to be okay if they get that word wrong. And only stop them when you know it's going to be a meaningful stopping point or a stopping point where you know it's going to impact their comprehension, right? So if they say a instead of the, let it go. The more we stop them, the more it is going to hinder their comprehension. So I just need to be aware of what goals I have for this student as far as fluency. So if our goals are, they're working on vowel teams and they stumble upon a word that doesn't have necessarily a vowel team in it, then I'm going to just give them the word and move on. We're not going to decode that word right now, right? What are their goals and where are there opportunities for us to work on those goals as we practice our fluency? Okay, as we read through this passage, because we're focused more on comprehension, a comprehension skill, and I don't want them to have to stop and decode every other word. So I'm going to think about each child individually and know that this student is working on this. So I'm gonna give them the words. I'm just gonna tell them the words as we go. They're going to say the word, repeat it after me. They know that. And they're going to continue on. But if we get to a word that I know that that's what we're focusing on as far as decoding and fluency, then that's what they're going to stop and try to do themselves. I hope I'm making sense. Basically, the point is I'm not stopping and helping them with every word. They're not stopping and decoding every word. Okay? I'm just going to tell them probably a good 50 to 70% of the words. And I know you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, I promise you it works. Because what I'm doing instead is I'm focused on their fluency goals and I'm giving them the support there rather than having to focus and stop on every word that they stumble on. And then therefore we're able to get through the passage quicker and now we can comprehend it better too. You see what I'm saying? So because I understand reasonable accuracy, I'm able to give students a more focused experience for fluency and then a better experience when it comes to comprehension. Okay. Another thing I want you to think about is the objective or the goal of the lesson that you're conducting with that student. If you have a group of students who struggle with fluency and your focus is making inferences, I want you to really think about that objective. What are you really trying to do in this lesson? Is it quickly going to turn into a fluency lesson? Or are you going to focus on making inferences? And I go back to what I preached about. Sorry if I did get on my soapbox for a little bit, but I go back to what I said earlier. Struggling readers can be exceptional thinkers. So I urge you to really look at your lesson and think, okay, is it okay if I read this to them? Absolutely. Because my goal in this lesson is not for us to struggle through it, is not fluency, it is to make inferences. So if we can read it together, if they can echo read it, or if they can do work on listening comprehension, and then it gets us to our goal of being able to understand inferencing, then that is going to increase their comprehension even more. Then when they're independent and they come across a part where they have to make an inference, they're going to be able to do it. Okay, do you see what I'm saying here? The transfer is going to be a lot more strategic and a lot more fluent if we stick to our objectives. Okay. Um, Also, when you are having your students read independently, and I don't mean like picking books off of a shelf, this has nothing to do with that. But when you are having them do a lesson with you, either whole group or small group, you want to try to keep the text short. Keep it between 50 to 200 words, okay? For the students who struggle, not for everyone. This is where you want to try to differentiate, try to find leveled passages. If anything, I would go on and find passages from ReadWorks, or if it would be a passage from our Basil, whatever. I would take the 5 minutes beforehand when I was planning my lessons, and I would retype the passage, and I would basically retype it and make it functional for that group of students. That way they were able to read the same passage that everyone else was reading, but it was shorter for them to help with the fluency issues, okay? So if you focus more on those shorter passages, then clearly you're going to eliminate a lot of struggling for those students who lack fluency. And again, the same kind of rules go into place. I then would focus on the objective. What did I really want them to get out of that passage? What was our focus? What were we learning? And also, going back to, I'm only going to make them stop and decode things that I know that they're working on. Students shouldn't have every goal under the sun with fluency. They should have specific goals and specific things they're working on. And so if they come to a word that I know they're not going to be able to code because we haven't covered that, I'm going to give it to them anyways. So those things then apply to those shorter texts. We're able to get through them quicker. Our success rate is higher. Our comprehension is higher. See how it all kind of unfolds, okay? Another great thing to do is reuse texts that you've already used. So if I have a fantastic passage that I used 2 weeks ago, for main idea and detail, and I used it in the small group, and then let's say it's a nonfiction passage, then guess what? I'm going to use that same passage 2 weeks from now when I'm focusing on text structure with the same group of kids. Because you can analyze a text with multiple lenses. And that's exactly what I tell my students. Yes, we've read this, but we had our main idea glasses on. Now we're going to put our text structure glasses on, and we're going to look at it a little bit differently. Now, will our thinking about main idea that we did with this text help us with text structure? Yes. And what great conversations to have with your students about how a lot of these skills kind of weave together. And it makes comprehension even stronger. So don't worry about having to find 1,000 different texts every week. Find a strong set of comprehension texts that you can use and then reuse them with different lenses. And so, because research shows rereading familiar texts for fluency increases fluency. So, in order for us to do that strategically, then I need to be strategic about the text that I'm picking. So, you can do this whole group to help with all of your students because it is a great research-based strategy. And I can do this small group with my students as well. So I just have to remember not to throw the passage away. I need to remember to think ahead. Okay, I've got a great passage. It's fictional and I can use it for these skills. Maybe put a post-it note on it and file it away under, fictional passages and just start, piling these up, and then at the end of the year you're going to have a great file of passages for fiction and nonfiction, and you've already put a post-it note on each one of all the different skills you can use it for. And so then when time comes, you're like, haven't we read this before? Yes, we have. Yes, we have, and it's perfectly fine. So that's a great research-based tip that I absolutely believe in. Another thing I want to mention too, and I think I already did kind of, but a strategy I use a lot for the students who I'm sitting down with and I'm focusing on a short passage, but I will do echo reading. Echo reading is a fantastic, again, research-based strategy to use, and it doesn't take a lot of time. But echo reading in of its the whole passage. I don't mean echo reading as I'm reading, a word and they read the word, or I read a phrase and they read a phrase, or even sentence by sentence. When we echo read, I read the entire passage and they have to track and follow along with me. Okay? If they're tracking and following along and thinking and listening, remember thinking, active thinking, then when they read it, they're going to be thinking about their thinking. So they're going to be using metacognition, and they're going to use that metacognition to be able to decode words. And it's a fantastic strategy. And so if I've been strategic about either using a familiar passage or using a short passage, and I use my echo reading strategy, then they're going to be able to get a quick fluency lesson in, and then we can move on to our comprehension focus of that lesson. So there are ways to get fluency practice in without it being the sole focus of our lesson. Okay? So that's echo reading or read and repeat, whatever you want to call that strategy for your students. Another great strategy is to pre-teach your vocabulary. Okay, and I've done this in 2 different ways. One way would be that you, the teacher, would pre-select words that your students are going to have trouble decoding. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a vocabulary word. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a word that they don't know, right? There are a lot of words that our students understand the meaning of, but when they actually go to decode them, they can't. So think more on the decoding side. Scan your passage or your text and look for words that your students are going to have trouble decoding. Present those words ahead of time. Practice decoding them with your students. So if you're doing guided reading, actual guided reading, this is a great strategy for a lot of your higher groups. You can go through and do some quick sentence strip activities that would take literally 2 minutes. You could use your whiteboards, but you write out the word and practice decoding, and you do that with the 5 words that you pulled out, and then boom, when you give them their quick passage, they're able to then see those words, decode them quickly, or remember them, which would be even better, and then continue on reading. The other way that I love to do this is I make my students find the words. So I will take 60 seconds at the beginning of my lesson or after I pass out my passage, and I will say, I want you to go through and I want you to highlight 4 to 5 words, 3 to 4 words, 1 or 2, up to you, whatever, words that you don't know how to read. And I make sure to say to them, not that you don't know what they mean. If you can read the word, don't highlight it. If you cannot say the word out loud, highlight it. And then we'll do a quick pair share where, they have to pair with their partner and see if they can help each other decode those words. Or, I'll do a quick shout out and we write as many words on the board as we can and we quickly go through and just shout out and read them. And then maybe I focus on 2 of those words and we actually practice decoding and chunking the word. So I can create a very strategic fluency lesson without having anything prepped and it being student driven, which is even better, in a matter of 3 minutes before we then are led into our comprehension lesson. So again, it's about kind of keeping these things separate, but then supporting each other at the same time. So pre-teaching the vocabulary words, and again, they're not actual vocabulary, but pre-teaching those ahead of time to support your students while they're reading. Great strategy. Another thing you want to make sure you do, and this kind of coincides with what I just mentioned, but preview the text, okay? So take time especially for the students who, struggle with fluency. Not everyone needs to do this, but take time to preview the text. Let them walk through and look at the illustrations, look at the headings, look at the title, look at the text features. And one of the games I love to play with my students is have them predict words that they think they're going to find in the story. So this works a little bit better with nonfiction than it does with fiction. But what they can do is, let's say they're reading a book and it's all about, dogs. So we will come up with a list of words that they might find in the text. So they may come up with color, bark, puppies, nutrition. You see where I'm going, right? I'm just coming up with things off the top of my head. Clearly, during my lesson, and if I knew I was doing that strategy, I would be a little bit more prepared, and I would have a list prepared, pre-prepared for me. That way I didn't struggle coming up with the words. But again, you would have them basically predict what words, and then you would go through and you write those down and we read them out loud. Because then what that is doing is that kind of goes back to the pre-selecting the vocabulary. These could be potential words that your students might struggle with. And if we're getting their active thinking going, meaning they're thinking about the text, so our metacognition is happening through this activity, and then we're able to go in and read the text and they come across these words, boom, they're going to know them, right? Because we focused on fluency and comprehension at the same time. So, right? Genius idea. So preview the text and predict words when you preview the text. So they kind of go hand in hand. Another great strategy is to make sure you're teaching your students to reread after they decode. Okay, so again, going back to if you're helping the students decode words and you're not helping them with every single word, right? They're not having to stop and decode every single word. But when they come to a word and they have to stop and decode it, teach them, get them into the habit of going back to the beginning of that sentence and rereading. Okay, I absolutely do this with all of my students, and I'm teaching my own children at home to do this as well. But when they stop and read a word and they have to sound it out, then they go back to the beginning of that sentence and they reread it. Because what that does is that's going to ensure that their comprehension is not necessarily impacted by their inability to fluently read that sentence. And so it takes a lot of practice because you're building a habit as a reader. Okay. I know because I do this as a reader. As an adult, if I come to a word I don't know, then I get sidetracked and I need to go back and I need to reread that sentence. And so if you can teach your students that this is what good readers do, then that's going to be something that they will then do on their own independently after they pick up this habit. So make sure that you're focusing on rereading after decoding, all right? All right, I've got two more little things I want to make sure I mention before we go tonight. I know I got on my soapbox at the very beginning, and if you are tuning in just now, you're going to want to make sure you go back to the beginning because I have some very insightful things that I want to make sure you hear. But I got on my soapbox a little bit about how even slow readers can be exceptional thinkers. And to me, that is one of my most true pieces of my philosophy as a reading teacher. And the reason I'm saying this again is because it goes into what I want to mention next. And that is to make sure you're teaching students thinking strategies and make sure that these are at the forefront of every lesson that you do. So by thinking strategies, I mean actual reading strategies, asking questions, visualizing, um, using their schema, making predictions. These are strategies that research has proven invokes active thinking in the student's brain. Skills like main idea, structure, cause and effect, fact and opinion, author's purpose, those don't invoke thinking. Those don't require a student to be an active reader to understand them. Okay? Those are things that I can do after the fact. All of the others, you have to be actively thinking during the text in order for them to happen. And then when they do happen, the comprehension then is therefore increased. Again, we can go on and on about reading strategies at a later time, clearly. But the reason I'm saying this is because even my slowest readers can be the most active thinkers. So if I am putting an emphasis in my classroom all about reading strategies, if my kids know that these are the most important things that a reader can do ever, then they're going to be successful regardless of their fluency rate. Okay? It does not matter if they read, if they have the slowest accuracy rate or the slowest accuracy percentage or the slowest rate percentage in the classroom. If they are using active thinking strategies as they read, they're going to get successful. They're going to be successful. So my students in my classroom knew what are the most important things when you read. They knew it was all about thinking. They knew it was visualizing, asking questions, using their metacognition, um, making predictions, making inferences. Those were the most important, determining importance. Those were it. They knew it. Okay? And I made sure of it. So that way, my lowest and slowest readers still had a chance to be the best exceptional thinkers in my class. And I kept those expectations high for all of them. Believe me, they were extremely high. And the final thing I'm going to leave you with, so I don't keep going off on that tangent, but the final thing and tip I want to leave you with is make sure for your students who struggle with fluency is that you check for comprehension more often. So if you are working with them in a small group and you have a passage picked out and you're working through it, stop every 4 sentences and have them tell you what's happening. Okay, what's happening right now? What did we just read? What's going on in the story? Use your own words to tell me what's happening. Whatever it may be, but get them to know that they should be thinking about this as they continue reading. What do you see in your mind right now? Okay, what questions do you have about what just happened? Anything that you can do to invoke some of those strategies that they should be using more often as they read, rather than just at the very end, is going to help with their fluency as well. And the reason why is because it's going to get them to stop and think. And if they know that they can't answer those questions, then they know they need to go back and reread. Okay? So that teaches them the importance of rereading, and it allows you to check for comprehension more often than when it's basically too late and I have to reread the whole passage. Okay? All right, so we've talked a lot about tonight about comprehension, especially about fluency, and how fluency, yes, it does impact comprehension, but it is not the end-all be-all. I can still get students, you can still get your students to be exceptional critical thinkers, to be able to comprehend text, even if fluency is a struggle. So I highly encourage you to kind of reflect on that group of students and to think about maybe what are some changes we can make. What are some things I can put in place or do differently to push them, because they can do it, to push them not only to be fluent readers, but to be exceptional thinkers and to be able to comprehend, because they can do it. They've got a brain, they can comprehend, even if they can't decode those words, they've got it in them. And when they realize that, their confidence is going to shoot through the roof and they're going to give you every ounce of like oomph that they have in them. I I keep like all these students' names keeps coming to mind of the students who at the beginning of the year were just the most struggling students, and I can see their faces and I know their names. And if I could tell you and take time to tell you each of their stories, you'd be blown away. But it was because I was very intentional about making sure that they knew that their inability to physically, verbally read those words did not have to impact their abilities to comprehend. And when they saw that power and they knew that they could raise their hands and volunteer and be thinkers, and that we could work on the fluency at a later time, and I gave them strategies and gave them support when it was strategic and intentional, it all came together and it came together fast. So I hope I didn't go off on too many tangents tonight. Clearly, I'm a little passionate about all this, but I also hope that I gave you a lot of great information that you can use with those students in your class. If you have any questions, please, please, please feel free to ask. I don't have a freebie for you tonight to take away, but hopefully the information that we got tonight was helpful, hopefully. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you all next week. Bye.